I fully endorse the Coalition of Climate Resilient Investment. It is a most promising private sector-led climate finance initiative for resilient infrastructure investment. This will help vulnerable countries prioritize actions and investments to protect economic, social, and ecosystem value from physical climate risks over the next decades. As a climate-vulnerable small island developing state, the principles and mandate of the Coalition of Climate Resilient Investment strongly resonate with Jamaica. We will present the product of our collaboration, Jamaica's first investment prioritization virtual tool, which integrates climate risk analytics into decision-making to achieve more efficient allocation of public and private capital towards building resilience.
Thank you for that. I have neglected to introduce myself, I realize. My name is Anaite Mills, and I'll be your MC for today for the official launch of the Systemic Risk Assessment Tool. Thank you to the Honorable Prime Minister for that endorsement. Today, we are gathered to tackle a key problem that any climate vulnerable country in the world is facing today. Investments in infrastructure, a sector particularly vulnerable to climate change, requires innovation, partnerships, and continued investment. And yet, these factors are challenged if the risks are not well understood, disclosed, and priced. Without proper risk assessment, infrastructure in Jamaica is a major threat. And if infrastructure investors, public or private, do not price and integrate climate risks into their models and processes, their return can quickly turn into losses. One way to solve this conundrum is to develop and tap into data that can help infrastructure investment decision makers better assess risk to more efficiently allocate financial resources. To kick us off, please allow me to welcome Dr. Wayne Henry from the Director General at the Planning Institute of Jamaica to provide his welcome remarks. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Ms. Moderator Anaite Mills, Senator the Honorable Matthew Samuda, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Sir Oliver Blake, Head of Political and Development Team, British High Commission, Carlos Sanchez, Director Climate Resilient Investment at Wills Towers Watson, and also Executive Director to the Coalition of Climate Resilient Investment, CCRI, Dr. Jim Hall, Director of Research in the School of Geography and the Environment at the University of Oxford, Katarzyna Ziamara Zosidlo, that's Human Settlements and Infrastructure Sector Senior Specialist at the Green Climate Fund, and Ms. Una May Gordon, Principal Director at the Climate Change Division in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Ms. Claire Bernard, Deputy Director General at the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Other distinguished guests, colleagues, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. You know, a Sunday school teacher asked the children to draw their favorite Bible story. And at the end of the class, she was collecting the drawings and saw a little girl drew a picture of a plane taking off and someone flying the plane. And the teacher thought, a plane in the Bible? She said, what story is this? The little girl said, it's a flight out of Egypt. And like a good teacher, she said, is that Moses flying the plane? She said, no, it's Pontius the pilot. Let me say it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Planning Institute of Jamaica today's official launch of the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, JSRAT. This marks an important stage in the journey, which began with Prime Minister Andrew Holness's endorsement of the establishment of the Coalition of Climate Resilient Investment, CCRI. The CCRI has been leveraged and has been leveraging the resources and expertise of large global financial institutions towards climate-resilient infrastructure development. CCRI and partners have also facilitated the design and testing of a tool to assist in prioritization of climate change adaptation and resilient infrastructure investment. Historically, Jamaica has experienced several weather-related shocks, which have had a significant adverse impact on our growth and development. Over the last 2 decades, for example, Jamaica has experienced some $135.5 billion in damage and losses, 63 billion of which is related to infrastructure damage. The severity of the impact, coupled with the lengthy recovery time, has served to erode years of development achievements, with losses ranging between 1 and 2% of GDP annually. Global projections and climate outlook outlined in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change AR6 Climate Change 2021 report and our own State of the Jamaican Climate Report 2019 indicate that we are in for unprecedented climate changes, which could wreak further havoc unless we harden our infrastructure and take urgent adaptation and mitigation action. As the climate crisis worsens, and with Kingston, our capital, being projected to be among the first cities in the world to experience climate departure as early as 2023, reducing climate risk broadly and specifically with respect to infrastructure has to be a national priority. All right, thank you. There you go. Speaking with a little more authority. We recognize that our adaptation efforts must be informed by data and science and build on the integrated disaster risk management approach in Vision 2030 Jamaica, our National Development Plan. Already, we have begun to lay the foundation for this more scientific approach, but there is room for improvement. Thus, JSRAT is an important data-driven addition to the analytical toolkit to aid assessment of climate risks, particularly with respect to critical infrastructure, such as water, transport, and energy. We anticipate that the combination of the analytical capabilities of this tool, along with those of relevant local platforms and the transfer of knowledge to local technical personnel, should help to better guide our decision-making on future location and investment for infrastructure. The JSRAT is a potential game changer. Thus, we look forward to its utility as a country, and as a country moves not only modernize, but also to retrofit and harden its infrastructure assets. I thank and congratulate all those associated with the development of this project for bringing it to the point of today's launch, and particularly wish to extend our appreciation to our partners, the CCRI, the Green Climate Fund, GCF, the Government of the United Kingdom, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, and the University of Oxford. To our local partners, including data providers, Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, the Climate Change Division, and stakeholders from other key ministries, departments, and agencies, thank you for your input in making this project a reality. I want to say special thanks also to the hardworking team at the PIOJ. And so, yes, thank you. And so in closing, the PIOJ will continue to support this initiative and look forward to working with you all as we embark on the next phase of this project, focusing on nature-based solutions and innovative ways of financing climate change, adaptation, and resilience. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Dr. Henry, DG. Bigging up all the teams. Thank you, DG, for your leadership, for encouraging research, innovation, and planning. I think your leadership and the support of the Planning Institute of Jamaica has been key to the success that we have been able to achieve so far, but the journey only starts. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Oliver Blake, Head of Political and the Development Team at the British High Commission in Kingston, Jamaica, who will offer remarks on behalf of the Government of the United Kingdom. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Anna. The Honourable Minister, DG of PIOJ, Executive Director, CCRI, Professor Hall, and all the members, distinguished members of your delegation come from many parts of the world today for this event. I'm very pleased to be here representing the British government, in particular representing High Commissioner Judy Slater, who is not in Jamaica at the moment. So I'm very pleased to be able to stand in for her and bring you these remarks this morning. When the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment was launched at the UN Climate Action Summit in September 2019, we knew we had a lot of work to accomplish in a short period of time to transform infrastructure investment by integrating climate risks into decision making. Without that integration of the risk, the wrong investments were being made or would be made in the wrong places. Money was not flowing into the right places in order to deliver the right results on investment. I'll come back to the question of money and money flow a little later. A tremendous amount of work has been done, helped and hindered by the pandemic. I think we've all seen the benefits and the downsides of virtual working. But I would like to commend the way in which all sides on this piece of work have been able to work together virtually. And it's so great for everybody to be able to come together physically this morning. But I would like to commend the excellent work that's been done virtually between all the partners on this program. So this work is driving a shift towards a more climate resilient economy for all countries, including the most vulnerable. CCRI is now 120 members strong and making progress across all three of its working groups. I'm very pleased that the CCRI team, with their colleagues from the GCF, with Professor Hall and team from Oxford University, are here this week. This is because of Jamaica's leadership on climate change and its capacity for strong technical engagement. So I really want to focus my remarks this morning on some other streams of work that are supporting the next steps of this program, getting climate finance to flow. Without the financing to follow, we will not see fully the benefits of this tool. The government of the United Kingdom has been partnering with Caribbean governments on climate resilience for over 10 years. Most of our programs in the 8 English-speaking ODA-eligible Caribbean territories focus on climate resilience. We deliver UK aid through the multilateral system as well as bilaterally, and always looking for ways to promote aid effectiveness. Coming to this region relatively recently, it's clear to me, though, that the climate emergency here in the Caribbean is not yet being treated fully as an emergency by the international community. The balance of risks, since we're talking about risks on this tool, the balance of risks seems to be wrong. In my view, the risk analysis needs to take a lot more into account the risks to people's livelihoods of not taking action in time. A lot of the work that we're doing in the international community has been too slow. We need to find ways of speeding up the flows of climate finance to respond to the threats that the DG has set out. So I am not sure that these risks to people's livelihoods, which are now becoming much clearer to the government and people of the Caribbean, are being properly considered by those organizations that provide climate finance. So the UK is determined to use our influence and expertise to correct that balance of risks and get climate finance flowing in the region. At COP26, in response to SID's requests from small island developing states, the UK announced some new programs which will target this transformation. So we're pleased to be funding a new small island developing states capacity and resilience program, which will be providing 40 million over 5 years for capacity support. However, a lot of capacity programs in the region, for all the good and use that they do, have not so far unlocked climate finance to any large extent. So we want to focus our efforts on identifying the bottlenecks to the flow of climate finance and helping to align all efforts to remove those bottlenecks. We have the task force on access to climate finance, jointly chaired by the UK and Fiji, which is aiming to reshape the climate finance system to make it more accessible and effective for climate vulnerable developing countries. This effectively, in many ways, cuts out the complicated accreditation processes and seeks to streamline approval and reporting processes, lining up finance behind a country's own climate plan. Jamaica is one of 5 countries piloting this work. The Infrastructure for Resilient Island States program will provide technical support on multifaceted issues posed by infrastructure systems and promote disaster and climate resilience of infrastructure assets in SIDS. IRIS builds on a prioritization tool piloted in Jamaica last year under the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure program, which is a multi-stakeholder global partnership of governments, the UN, multilateral development banks, private sector, and academic institutions. And in keeping with requests from SIDS to support diversification of economies, the UK is also in early stages of rolling out a sustainable Blue Economies programme sponsored by the recently launched UK Blue Planet Fund. Activities are still being defined for this programme. So in all of these initiatives, there is one common theme, and Jamaica is at the forefront of all of them. And there's a good reason for that, for why Jamaica is piloting much of this work, and why we're doing this as a UK-Jamaica partnership. That is because of the shared, strong political commitment to tackling climate change, and because of the impressive technical engagement of the people of Jamaica that are working on these initiatives, without which this work could not have progressed as it has. I must congratulate PIOJ, Climate Change Division, and others in Jamaica who've been taking this work forward so well. I'm, of course, equally keen to commend the engagement and skills of the CCRI team, GCF, and colleagues who've been supporting this work under the leadership of Professor Hall from Oxford University. This is an excellent example of the technical excellence in the UK being used to tackle real problems in the developing world. I'm very grateful for the team for coming here this week and for all their work on this partnership. This is pace-setting work that others in the region will build on and learn from. So congratulations to everyone for coming this far, and we look forward to continuing this work as it goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blake, Oliver, if I may call you Oliver, because you have been incredibly supportive of the climate change agenda in Jamaica, and he's quite busy. We keep him quite busy in all the climate change events, so it's always good to see you. Partnerships are very important for effective investment, and I'm pleased to welcome Carlos Sanchez, Executive Director of the Coalition of Climate Resilient Investment, a private sector-led initiative, who will speak on behalf of more than 120 members to the coalition, especially those working actively to bring innovative and practical solutions to Jamaica. Carlos, thank you.
Anaite, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. Ambassador Oliver, Dr. Henry, Minister Jim, how special to be here with all of you today. And it is with a mix of, I think, extreme pride but also humility as of what has taken us to be here in what has been a long journey and not an easy one. My personal words of gratitude to the government of Jamaica, critical stakeholders, amazing professionals, and wonderful human beings about what you have supported CCRI over the last 2 years are, I just simply have no words. I remember clearly when we were in 2019 at the preparatory meetings of the UN Climate Action Summit in Abu Dhabi, and Ambassador Rattray and Anaite were there, and Yuna May also was there to support us. And CCRI was supported at that stage when CCRI was really next to nothing. It was a very good idea, very well motivated, but the trust and support that we received that day from the government of Jamaica, then at the summit with Prime Minister words, was simply incredible. It would have been really arrogant of us to imagine this day today at that point, because this is a level of success and progress that we have never expected. It's incredible. In that regard, I wanted, no problem. Thank you. In that regard, there have been words about the importance of this work, and we all understand how this work is really transformational and important to Jamaica. But let me elaborate a little bit further on how much attention, interest, and traction this very project is gathering globally. When CCRI was created, it was created as an initiative led by the private sector as a recognition that we are not being efficient in integrating physical climate risk in investment decision making. It was recognized that actually, in some instances, doing this exercise of integrating physical climate risk is actually penalized. So we needed to work along a multi-industry, multi-region, multi-sector coalition to really work on the very practical solutions. In that regard, we identified 3 critical exam questions and solutions that were needed for real transformational change, in that how every dollar that is invested is certified to maximize the protection, economic, social, ecosystem value, but also to private sector risk-adjusted returns. Those 3 levels were at the national level, so systemic as we call it, and what we are presenting today is an incredibly innovative first of its kind solution at that level. And at that level, we need to answer the question of how can I make sure that every dollar that I'm allocating is maximizing the protection of my country over the next 20 years. That should result in a series of projects where we understand that those are the projects that will protect my economic, social, ecosystem value over the next 20 years. The next question is, in each of those projects, how should I design, structure, and finance those? And that is a very different question. And in that regard, I'm very proud to share with you that CCRI has advanced and tested what is called the Physical Climate Risk Assessment Methodology, or PCRA. This has been led by 25 leading institutions in the world, pension funds, asset managers, multilaterals, engineering, rating agencies. And rating agencies, as we all know here, are quite crucial to this discussion, along with insurance, along with risk data providers. What we have achieved is a methodology that is capable of taking one single project and analyze, scrutinize how CapEx, OpEx, depreciation, net present value, in other words, the performance of that asset can be certified and analyzed. So that we go to the second level. So we went to national planning. What are those projects that are strategic to my country to protect it? Then we go to the asset level, how each of those needs to be designed. But then we go to the financing level, where, as we know, and as I indicated already, cost of capital, credit quality, all those considerations need to really step up, need to really get to support this discussion, to enhance it, to reward good management. And that's where we are working on the League of Investment Funds for Resilience, or LIFR. Effectively, this is a series of investment vehicles that are taking CCRI solutions and translating that into real investment. And in the middle, we have developed a series of reports with Standard & Poor's, S&P Global, that for each of the case studies upon which we developed the PCRA, which were 5 real infrastructure investments, these reports conclude that PCRA and CCRI provide the best means for an actor, be it a government, be it an institutional investor, to see a better recognition, a better reward in terms of improved credit quality. What I want to say with this is that there is a continuum, there is a sequencing, that what we are speaking today is that first piece of the domino, which for force and physics reason is the hardest one. It's the first one that needs to be moved, but that this journey, this partnership is a long term, that we are incredibly grateful to the government of Jamaica and other stakeholders in the country for their trust and support, but that we are here to really support you much farther. There are private actors, private finance, multilateral, that are really keen to be here and to prove the concept and change the narrative and in a way the paradigm, because we're really stuck in the past perception globally of how resilience investments are expensive investments, are tedious investments that really don't make sense from an investment standpoint. But that is not the reality. We are together. We are changing that narrative to prove that resilient investments are simply better investments. And all the private actors that are part of CCRI, they totally validate that. They think that this is an opportunity. They want to integrate. We have a number of pension funds, asset managers that are already integrating CCRI solutions into their decision making. And it's because they see the world changing towards that. So I just wanted to highlight that there is an incredible opportunity going forward. In that regard, again, what we want to convey is that CCRI is a totally open doors initiative, that we want to engage local actors, that there is a lot for private actors in Jamaica to contribute to, that with the government of Jamaica, we just want to go in the long term in this partnership. There is so much interest across OECD and non-OECD governments that are asking us about that experience in Jamaica. You are setting a blueprint for innovation, and there is an incredible level of interest in that regard. And thank you very much, Senator Minister and Dr. Henry and Oliver, for the thanks notes to the different actors, GCF, the UK government, CDO, University of Oxford, PIOJ, Government of Jamaica. There is one person that is not with us today that is actually, I'm hoping that she's watching, that is Nikki Jentz, also at FCDO. She's been an absolutely crucial, wonderful ally and supporter, and we miss her today. But it's simply wonderful to see so many faces, to meet some in person. And I would finish by saying that the day that we spoke to Ambassador Rattray and Anaite, we thought that this was going to be very much like a 100-meter dash, and that who best to partner with than Jamaica for something like that. This has turned now into a half marathon. You know, we faced and we hit a little bit of an unexpected crisis with COVID and all of that, but we still have won, and you know, you're the best partner possible for any type of race. So please consider us to be here for you, for anything that you want. This week is going to be fantastic and special, and maybe with this I will finish. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Carlos. So you can see how Carlos pitched this project to Prime Minister Holness. He basically tackled him in a hallway in the United Nations, and Prime Minister was definitely engaged and intrigued because there's risk in pricing risk. And absolutely, I remember well, other island states that were in the United Nations were hesitant, couldn't understand why would Jamaica pursue understanding risk at this level. But I think is precisely exactly what we need to do. We need to understand what risk we're dealing with in Jamaica in order to plan for better investments. So thank you, Carlos, for that. Under these first stages of the pilot project here in Jamaica, we have benefited from the analysis and dedication of a group of researchers and experts in assessing climate risk in major infrastructure networks. Allow me to welcome Dr. Jim Hall from the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford, also representing our research team here in the first and second rows. Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Anate. And Honourable Minister, Dr. Henry, ladies and gentlemen, it's really exciting to be here today in Jamaica for the launch of the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool. As Dr. Henry said in his introduction, the impacts of climatic extremes in Jamaica and in small island states around the world and more broadly a real obstacle to development and impact on people's lives and well-being. When Minister Pernille Charles came to COP26 in Glasgow, he explained that though the Caribbean has less than 0.5% of the world's population, it's impacted by a disproportionate amount of the impacts of climatic extremes. And those repeated hits, time after time, which unfortunately science tells us are going to become more severe in the future, are impacting people's lives, economies, and the development possibilities of these islands. And infrastructure is really central to that. It's a valuable public asset, so the direct damage to infrastructure when climatic extremes hits public finances. And it also is the essential network, the critical network, which all of economies and societies depend upon. So when infrastructure fails and are disrupted, the impacts of that cascade through societies. People don't get the essential services that they need, from energy, water, mobility, goods and services that they need. We know in principle how to respond to that, how to make systems more resilient. We can strengthen them, as I saw on the road from the airport yesterday evening. We can build systems that are more resilient because they have early warning, they're able to respond and recover and build back fast. And we can strengthen natural assets, which physical infrastructure depends upon, nature-based solutions. But we know that resources are scarce. On the one hand, as Carlos has said, there's a growing interest in investment in resilience and in resilient investments. And many donors and development banks around the world are looking to invest in resilience. But on the other hand, we recognize the economic situation in the world at the moment. So we have to make a very compelling case for those investments. And it's very easy to waste resources, to over-adapt rather than under-adapt, to maladapt. So prioritizing, putting investments in the right place at the right time is absolutely essential. And in order to prioritize, we need to know where the risk is, how it will change in the future in a changing climate, how much risk could be reduced by investment in resilience, and how much will that cost. And that is what the systemic risk assessment tool does. What is JSRAT? It is an interface, and in a moment we'll see some of that. And in the first phase of the training that our team is doing today, people will get an opportunity to interact with that interface. But then underneath the computer interface, there's vast quantities of data, and there are computer codes, which those of you who come along to the more intensive training, which will take place over the next 3 days, will have an opportunity to explore that data and to use and understand exactly how those computer codes work. And they help us to pinpoint risks, to understand the direct damages, the economic disruption, how that might change in the future, what are the benefits of adaptation, and to come up with ranked lists of possible adaptation options. This has been a long journey, as Carlos explained. It originated with this very productive interaction between the CCRI, the government of Jamaica, the PIOJ. Somehow or other, Carlos found me and the team in the University of Oxford, and we have benefited, as we've heard, from support from the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office in the UK, and it's been a great pleasure to collaborate with the Green Climate Fund on this journey. It's wonderful to be here in Jamaica with my team, with Tim, Raghav, Tom, Jasper, Olivia, and Robin. And I must certainly and above all acknowledge the members of our team in Jamaica, the wonderful Anate, who's been hosting us, Ardeth Grant, Edson Williams, who've all been working incredibly hard in Jamaica as our very close partners. It would not have been possible to do this work without them. And, but we come to Jamaica not as an end, but as a milestone along a journey and as a celebration. This week we're going to be training, promoting uptake and discussing precisely how this tool fits within the processes and policies of the government of Jamaica, and no doubt identifying gaps and areas for further development, as well as thinking how this tool, which in many senses is quite generic, is transferable, how this technology, which the government of Jamaica has pioneered, can be transferred to other settings in the Caribbean and around the world. So I really thank you for your extremely warm welcome to Jamaica. We look forward to working with you to achieve the climate resilient infrastructure that we all need in the future in the face of a changing climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, for joining us in Jamaica and for your expert guidance during this last year of analysis conducted by the Oxford team in close collaboration with all institutional sectors here in Jamaica, in WC, NWA, in LA, JPS. There's so many institutions that have been able to provide key data and expert guidance. So thank you. And I know for sure that at this point, you don't want to keep waiting to discover the tool and this timely resource. I just want to acknowledge that we have about 70 participants joining us online, as well as everybody here. So thank you for everybody who has connected this morning to follow. So the government of Jamaica will have at its disposal to advance this tool to advance to the next level of climate analytics, infrastructure investment, and climate risk assessment. To mark this occasion and officially launch the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, it is only fitting to welcome to the stage a minister who has represented Jamaica on several occasions internationally, advocating for environmental protection, ocean and ecosystems conservation, justice, and climate action. His schedule is packed this week, but we are extremely grateful for your support today. Please join me in welcoming Senator the Honorable Matthew Samura, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Madam Master of Ceremonies. Allow me to acknowledge also the presence of colleague parliamentarian, MP Anthony Hilton, opposition spokesperson on industry, and good friend, Dr. Wayne Henry, Director General of the PIOJ, Mr. Oliver Blake, Head of the Political and Development Team at the British High Commission, Mr. Carlos Sanchez, Executive Director of the CCRI, Jim Hall, Director of Research at the University of Oxford, coalition partners including the Green Climate Fund, Willis Tower Watson, the University of Oxford, Oxford's Environmental Change Institute, and international guests, representatives of varying ministries, departments, and agencies of the government of Jamaica, Jamaica's private sector and academia representatives, and all participants who have joined us online. It is indeed my pleasure to join you this morning. Jamaica is acutely aware of how the physical risks associated with climate change threaten the country's development and well-being and economic security of our citizens. It seems we are perpetually recovering from an extreme flooding event, dealing with displacement and loss of infrastructure. And this is unfortunately become our situation every year. And it does feel more frequent as we see powerful storms threaten the Caribbean each year and put us at even greater economic and physical risk. Jamaica has a long history of devastating damage from natural hazards. Infrastructure has been one of the greater victims. This is indeed projected to increase in the future. To put it in perspective, loss and damage assessments conducted by the PIOJ indicate that total damage from 7 hurricane events, 2 tropical storms, and at least 3 extreme flooding events between 2001 and 2010 was estimated to be approximately 111 billion Jamaican dollars, an average of 2% of average GDP, of annual GDP rather. Jamaica experiences recurring high levels of damage caused by flooding, especially to the road network and bridges. Similarly, during Hurricanes Emily and Dennis in 2005, the damage was estimated to amount to US 3.7 billion, including 100,000 electricity customers being disrupted, damage to water supply systems, and major damage to roads. In fact, colleagues, an entire generation would tell you that for many of us, certainly for me, our first moment of consciousness was after Hurricane Gilbert and seeing the damage that would have taken place in that space to homes, to schools, to churches, and to public infrastructure. So many of us are very clear on the impact of such storms. The government recognizes the need for expansion and modernization of critical infrastructure. On that note, we have recently announced the allocation of 31 billion Jamaican dollars for our national infrastructure program that will see among important investments in highways, road networks, installation of drains, wastewater and sewage infrastructure, and rehabilitation of the water supply network. This infrastructure program will seek to drive jobs and economic activity, improve productivity, and strengthen resilience. But particularly important, it will become the base of much economic growth. Increased investment in infrastructure is needed in Jamaica as a part of actions to progress the economic development and growth agenda. For these investments to be effective, sustainable and beneficial for this generation and for future generations, our investments must also go hand in hand with our economic recovery, and our national development plan, certainly Vision 2030, and in alignment with our climate targets. We can't prevent natural disasters from happening, but we can avoid the ripple effects of climate change if we act on adaptation and resilience today. Jamaica has taken a holistic approach to building adaptation and resilience, which takes in consideration first and foremost the development of the right governance framework that allows not only for climate-related policies to be effectively implemented, but also allows for a whole-of-government approach to mainstreaming climate change within the national development policies and processes, including public investment processes. We have initiated the process to develop a national adaptation plan with the support of the GCF. We are also actively implementing our nationally determined contributions, seeking to reduce carbon emissions and decarbonize our energy and transport sectors. And we are looking to drive medium and long-term climate action by developing a long-term low-carbon and climate-resilient strategy. However, if we want to close the infrastructure gap in times on tight budget constraints and slow economic growth, we need to understand the economic value of assets at risk and how to leverage our natural assets to propose green solutions. Such information is crucial to mobilize a scale of public and private capital necessarily to truly build back better. We also must move beyond strategy and planning and rapidly increase public and private sector investment in key sectors where our physical assets are more at risk. We must forge greater and pragmatic collaboration and partnerships. In considering this great challenge, I am pleased to mark 2 years of partnership with the CCRI, an initiative chaired by Willis Towers Watson, a leading global risk management company and the 3rd largest insurance broker in the world. With the support of the UK government and its Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, and the GCF, I thank you for responding to the encouragement and public endorsement of the Most Honourable Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, in joining with us. I'm extremely pleased for the work achieved during these last 2 years, despite difficult constraints because of COVID. This speaks greatly to the dedication of the international and national project teams. With the guidance of Dr. Henry and his team at the PIOJ, the CCD, and the very capable hands of experts researchers from the University of Oxford and the Environmental Change Institute. Therefore, I could not neglect to recognize the collaboration and contributions of every single sectoral expert and staff within our national institutions, as well as the University of the West Indies. This is truly how partnership should look like. Public and private sector, academia and civil society all working together to generate the solutions for the problems that affect us all. The Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, or JSRAT, a key output of this pilot project, has been developed to identify hotspots across the country's major infrastructure networks, such as energy, water, transport, most vulnerable to climate risk, ensuring the effective, efficient investment of public and private resources. Additionally, during the next 3 days, the University of Oxford will be delivering a comprehensive training program to transfer this knowledge to our national experts. This is key to strengthening our national capacity. Getting infrastructure right is a question of making the right choices. Myriads of choices relating to investment prioritization, planning, design, maintenance, and rehabilitation. These choices must be accompanied with solid data and must be able to create the spaces for partnerships within the public and private sectors to flourish and indeed facilitate the growth we need. Today, this output becomes an instrument of resilience building for Jamaica, to be used by Jamaicans and to become a point of reference for many other climate vulnerable countries in the world. This is the time for all of us to answer the call for climate action. In Jamaica, this is as real as it gets. 70% of our population lives within 5 kilometers of the sea. We are indeed in a race against time. And understanding and proactively confronting the challenges related to physical climate risks is a critical element of the transformation of the global financial system that we in Jamaica believe will continue to advocate for. It is therefore my pleasure to officially launch the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool and to congratulate you on the job well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We have a short video to show a little bit the attendees about this tool. If my colleagues at JIS can play it now. Jamaica risk assessment tool has been launched. It now is fully transferred to the government of Jamaica to be used, effectively applied in processes, and sustained, and hopefully be used for many, 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 many years to come. Thank you, Minister, for officially launching this tool. I think you have launched a few tools this year, but that's how we do it here in Jamaica. We really want a toolbox that can be used by many government agencies, public and private sector. So again, please give a round of applause to yourselves, to Minister Zamora, Dr. Henry, Oliver Blake, Carlos Sanchez, Dr. Hill, and all the teams that are behind and next to all these great representatives. Thank you again, everybody, for accompany us today in this official launch. I would like to invite Minister Zamora and the speakers to the front for a photo opportunity to mark this special occasion. And for the rest of our attendees on site, please note that we would like to invite you to a coffee break right after the photo opportunity while we transition to the first part of the training program, in which Dr. Hall will be providing an overview and more details about the tool and the methodology into the next part of the program. So thank you again. Minister Zamora, can I invite you to the front? And my fellow media photographers, please guide us to the best positioning. I'll let the experts take over and the media take over, please. They are very excited, as you can see. Everybody needs coffee, including my JIS team. Thank you.
Everybody wanna feel like troubles in the wrong way. You know, feel a reggae music sweet. Skanking sweet. So skanking. Everybody wanna feel.
Hello. All right, we're back. Please be seated. We are going to start the second part of this important official launch of the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool. For those who are just joining us online or on site, my name is Anaite Mills and I am the project in-country liaison. I would like to welcome you all to the first session of the training program for the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, which will be led by the Environmental Change Institute from the University of Oxford. Let me welcome to the head table Dr. Jim Hall, our program manager for the Environmental Change Institute, as well as our two lead instructors, Dr. Raghav Pant, Senior Research Associate, and also Tom Russell, Senior Research Software Engineer, who will be leading the presentation today. So what we are going to aim to deliver you in this short session from now until lunchtime will be an overview, a more detailed overview about the tool, the reasons, the context to its development, the methodology that lead us to have this fully developed tool available for the government of Jamaica today. I recognize Dr. Henry's presence here. Dr. Henry, thank you so much for staying with us, as well as Ms. Claire Bernard, James Stewart, the team at PIOJ, also Carlos Sanchez remaining with us. Thank you so much. And also to all the sectoral, academic, and the rest of institutions that I can see from here. Also recognizing all the people that are following us online for the second training. Okay, so Dr. Hall, welcome to the stage. Please give him a round of applause so he feels excited.
Thank you very much indeed, Anate. And so now we're getting into a little bit of detail and depth in terms of what the Jamaican systemic risk assessment tool is and what it can do. The our aim in this collaboration with PIOJ and CCRI is to see the JSRAT being used in order to inform decision-making around resilient infrastructure in Jamaica. So that's really the aim of this, this training, which we're starting now and will be doing in the coming days. And in my experience with doing climate risk analysis, decision analysis, adaptation planning, is that things get used when they connect specifically with problems that people are trying to solve, with things that they have to do in order to do their day job. Decisions, for example, where there is a requirement to include climate risk assessment. Maybe literally a box you have to tick, but hopefully something a bit more substantive in saying, well, you've got this set of alternatives in front of you, but we need to understand how climate change might impact those alternatives. So which of these alternatives is going to be more resilient? What are the climate threats? What are the potential impacts? And so how do we prioritize? And if decisions like that are part of your day job, then I hope that the Jamaican JSRAT can help, and that in this training session we'll be able to explain how it can help. As I said very briefly at the launch session just a few moments ago, we think of the JSRAT as having basically three different components to it. The most visible bit being the user interface, which, as you've seen from the video clips you've already had in front of you, is a customized GIS interface which enables us to navigate around Jamaica geographically and to extract layers of information, layers relating to climate hazard, infrastructure exposure, people and buildings and sites of economic activity which depend upon infrastructure, and then layering that together to calculate direct damages and risks and indirect impacts. And then there's a set of adaptation options which JSRAT helps you to prioritize. So that's all embedded within the interface, and that's what we're going to focus upon in this session leading up until lunchtime. The so-called Tier 1 training aims to give everyone two things. First, a conceptual overview of what's actually being done in the tool, and that's what Raghav Pant is going to talk to us about in a moment. So Raghav's going to show some slides which unpack the concepts and methodology within JSRAT, and then some hands-on use of the interface, which is what Tom Russell is going to go through. And I think you've all been given access to the tool, and so those of you with laptops and everyone online who presumably is using a computer can can access the tool and start interacting with it and seeing what it does and hopefully not breaking it. So we're expecting that this session, and particularly the second part of it, the piece that Tom is leading, is interactive. Please, as we go along, if there's anything you don't understand, ask questions straight away, and we'd be very happy to have some discussion. Challenge us in terms of what's going on in this tool, and we're hoping also to have some discussion around how it can be made better, how we can take this thing forward, because we're certainly not supposing that it answers all of the questions that you might have about the climate resilience of infrastructure. And the final thing I would say also is that though we're looking forward to a lot of feedback, this is not your last chance, in that we're first of all here for the remainder of this week, but we've been interacting with PIOJ for years now. We know each other well. We're looking forward to further interaction. So if you have questions, you know where to find us, and we'll be very happy to respond and provide further support going forwards. So with that, let me hand over to Raghav, who's going to provide the conceptual overview of what is underneath the bonnet in JSRAT.
Thank you, Jim. And can I request the team over there to project my slides on the TV? Oh, thank you very much. So I think a lot of scene setting has been done, so I kind of wanted to just jump directly into a bit of overview PowerPoint slides, and I think I would want to make it quick because I don't come between you and actually exploring the tool. But I think a bit of a background has to be given for us to understand where we are coming from. And yeah, we have these are called training sessions, but to be honest, from our perspective, these are kind of co-learning sessions, because we have we don't think we are kind of really in a place that we can train you to kind of tell you what is good or what is bad in Jamaica. It's a process that we have done some analysis, and we want to kind of see with you how best it kind of suits your purposes and what's the best that you get out of it, and how we can kind of transfer that capability to you. So this is an iterative process of learning, and yeah, we would like to make it as interactive as possible. So coming up to the kind of what is the main kind of questions that are answered by this Jamaica JSRAT tool is that it wants to kind of identify which is the most vulnerable infrastructure assets, and we kind of have looked at energy, water, and transport infrastructures, and we've kind of looked at them very spatially, and that's what you'll see later on in the tool visualization. And we want to kind of understand what are the likely climate hazards, which in our case we've looked at hurricanes and floods, and droughts as well, that these infrastructures are exposed to. What are the direct damages and indirect economic losses that infrastructures failures result in? And with infrastructures, one of the interesting things is this indirect impact, because a given section of road or a substation or a water treatment plant doesn't just fail and has an impact in isolation, but affects the whole community, affects kind of wider economic users, and so it's very important to capture that. And what we try to do is we try to capture this whole picture and try to see how these risks to infrastructure assets can be quantified, and then how these risks change into the future. And the whole purpose of risk analysis is leading us towards this question of adaptation options, because one of the questions we always get is like, so what if you said that this is how bad it's going to be done? The more important question is, if something goes bad, how best you can kind of then prevent it, and what kind of climate resilience alternatives you can build. So we have kind of, in this tool, it's a generalized exploration of adaptation options, and we'll come to that later on, but kind of the tool is capable of understanding asset level adaptation investments that could then lead to prioritization on where investments should be made. So just kind of giving you a bit of a technical overview of the methodology, and I'll try to make it hopefully simple. So our overall risk methodology, is kind of just captured in this one slide, where we have assembled a lot of these data sets in Jamaica, as we've been discussing lots of hazard information, infrastructure networks of energy, transport, and water, and the important thing is lots of detailed spatial information. And essentially what it boils down to is taking all these hazards and overlaying them with infrastructure assets to infer these failures or direct damages that infrastructure assets might sustain due to exposure to a hazard. And we also kind of build models to understand how economic losses can be quantified at these assets. And this kind of is done in order to understand what the impact is over the whole network. That is what makes it systemic. The systemic part basically comes in understanding that how one individual asset's failure might have a whole network effect. And in this study, we have kind of basically, on the risk side of things, we are looking at two kind of metrics. One is a direct damage metric, and one is an indirect loss metric. And we are kind of quantifying them in terms of, given that we have lots of probabilistic hazard events, hazard maps, so we want to kind of capture in any given year what's the average annual kind of impact of these direct damages and economic losses. And the value of JSRAT mainly is doing this spatially and building these kind of maps that you see over here, where kind of you can just look at different kind of colors or different kind of ways we have highlighted things and identify like, oh, this is the one which is highest in this map, this is the one which is the most critical, and this is the kind of this might be the potential impact of its disruption. And this whole tool is, of course, based on data sets which are built for Jamaica, which kind of, even though lots of them come from global studies, but we've kind of made sure that they do appreciate the Jamaica context. So, for example, we've looked at fluvial and pluvial flood data sets from this company in the UK called JBA, who have generated different maps at different return periods and with different climate scenarios. And their map product, there was some degree of validation for Jamaica from their side to see that it makes sense. We've looked at coastal flooding maps, again, from some global data sources, tropical storms as well from global data sources, and my colleague Olivia has kind of developed a droughts model, which is very specific to Jamaica and does take data from University of West Indies and other resources in the country. And all this data on the hazard side of things is kind of combined with this infrastructure data sets, for which we have heavily depended on people like yourself and organizations within Jamaica to supply us information, and we are extremely grateful for that. So just kind of as a summary, and over, I guess, the next days for the Tier 2 trainees, we'll probably explore some of these data sets, but the idea is that we have this whole kind of database of detailed infrastructure assets within the country covering energy, transport, and water. And one of the things we've also done in this study is we've built a detailed building level data set using OpenStreetMap data sets and also data sets from the Land Planning Agency and other kind of organizations within Jamaica to kind of build a richer understanding of buildings by their usage and economic activity tied to that. And that is kind of a unique kind of feature that, I mean, at least I have not done anywhere else in the world. So for me personally, this was the first doing this kind of detailed modeling within Jamaica. And for all these data sets, what we are really capturing is what is the value of these assets that we have kind of integrated in our data sets, the value of damage that they'll sustain and the economic value disrupted. And the kind of, so every hazard will not really cause a damage to every infrastructure. Some hazards will affect some infrastructures, some will affect others. So one of the things we've kind of taken in this study, we've kind of looked at intersections of infrastructures with different hazards and then tried to understand which hazards cause infrastructure damages. So for example, energy assets might be affected by by flooding in general. Some of them, like transmission lines and distribution lines, might not be affected, and they might be more affected by tropical cyclones. Generally, we got a feedback that infrastructures like roads and railways are not really affected by winds, they're more affected by floods. So this table kind of comes through some iterative interaction and feedback from stakeholders in Jamaica, and what hazards do they think affect different infrastructure assets. And this is just for the nerds in the room to say, like, within the assumptions of this of this model. There are some kind of underlying simplifications that we have taken. When we say damage, we mean like something that's been literally extensively damaged or damaged beyond repair. So we say like a substation is just washed away, or a piece of road is just washed away by a flood, and we need to kind of literally rebuild or rehabilitate parts of the system. And then if you're doing this kind of analysis, some of the kind of simple assumptions that you have to say, like, well, in Jamaica, maybe flooding only above 50 centimeters of flood depth might have an effect. And this is something that in previous studies, the University of West Indies has published some papers, and we refer to them. Similar with cyclones, we looked at some previous studies that were done in Jamaica, and generally people assume that cyclones in excess of some certain threshold only affect infrastructure assets. So there are lots of, I've just given these very, very simple 3 bullets, but there are far more assumptions, as you would appreciate in the database study. So I'll just quickly go to the failure. What? Sure. Oh, they want to move the screen. Okay, no. I don't need the screen, so. Okay. Yeah, I've been told that the screen is going to be moved, so. So we are having a pause, sorry.
Apologies for interrupting, but we realized that that screen should be on that side, so people can follow the training on that side. Apologies for that mistake, so we're gonna correct it right away. And just to note that for the rest of the training, we're gonna have a proper big screen so everybody can follow the presentation. I think the live streaming today is limiting us.
Yeah, they haven't missed any. The real tool has not been shown yet, right? So
Thank you. Sorry for that interruption.
Yes.
So we're going to set up the other screen there. And yes.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
The last slide.
Yeah.
When you talk about the 50 centimeter.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Did the modeling look at any parameters that looked at frequency? Oh, thank you. Sorry. Forgive me. I'm an economist, so I'm struggling with jargon. But one of the things that we're seeing in the region is when we speak about flooding, you have flooding because you've had extreme rainfall in a lot of rain in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
It could be a little rain in a very, very short period of time, or it could be sustained light rainfall over a long period of time. So I'm not clear when you say floods above 50 centimeters, what that means. So I just want to be clear in my own mind what that's modeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll just go back to another slide which describes the hazards. And when you talk about frequency, then this exceedance probability or this return period, this basically means how frequent a flood can happen. Like 1 in 20 means it can happen at least, it is a probability of happening 1 by 20 probability of happening in a given year. So that shows how frequent it is. And what these are static flood maps. So what they kind of quantify at the end of the day, like they take like 3 or 4 days of kind of accumulation of flood waters and stuff, and then they kind of pretty much quantify them into like at the end of this period of flooding, this will be the level of water that is kind of accumulated. So in a way, there's a bit of a static kind of flood map over here that is created and says like, well, in a given area, this is the level of flood that is following an event that accumulated, or during an event that accumulated, with a certain kind of frequency, this kind of event can happen. And we use basically that information to say like, well, in a given area, there's an accumulation of water at that level. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah, if there are kind of questions, anytime, please feel free to interject. I'm happy to answer questions as best as I can. If they're very difficult, I'll refer them to Jim. So I'll just quickly go to the bit where just talking about some sort of like what this whole kind of methodology model and outputs are produced from this methodology. So in general, kind of, as you will see later on when the interactive demonstration of the visualization tool is done, What we are trying to do over here, in general, we are kind of capturing this, as I said, damages and losses. And what do we mean by damages? As I said, it corresponds to like this rehabilitation associated with replacing costs. So, for example, in this graphic that I pulled out, it shows that there's a substation that is within a flood outline, and this substation is potentially kind of then damaged once we kind of note how much flood it's exposed to, how much value, and what's the cost of the damage that is sustained. But as I said, infrastructures do have an indirect effect. So this is the losses that we are going to quantify, which basically with this substation, there will be a whole service area of buildings that it is serving. And we have modeled some sort of GDP per day associated with this building. So it is kind of capturing that effect that if this substation is knocked out, that amount of kind of service to those buildings will be pretty much disrupted. And that disruption would lead to that economic displacement of economic activity. This is kind of a simple kind of way of basically understanding it, and there's of course more nuances in the model, and in the tier 2 training we'll kind of cover some of those nuances. But the main message that I want, for like a take-home message, is like it's the damages and these losses which we are kind of mainly concentrating, which come out of this analysis. And the two output, when we talk about risk, is these two metrics which we kind of capture, which is they call expected annual damage and expected annual economic loss, which essentially in simple terms means in any given year, what is the average losses in terms of direct damages and economic impact which are sustained. And these are calculated across, so what you see here is a curve which basically shows a certain return period event on the x-axis and a damage and loss sustained for that return period event. So it could be a 1 in 20 event, a 1 in 50, a 1 in 200 event, and for that you kind of calculate how much of a given substation or a given piece of road or a water asset might be damaged and what losses it might sustain because of its damage, because of that particular exposure to that level of hazard. And then you kind of calculate this as some sort of a area under a loss probability curve. And this is pretty much when we say risk as calculation, this is what the risk calculation is, calculating these two metrics in our whole study. And the value of this kind of calculation leads us towards then developing these kind of spatial insights. And we kind of have, for example, in our study, we've looked at every individual asset in our system. So for example, this looks at every individual electricity overhead line and its exposure to cyclone hazards. And for that, it captures the direct damages, which is shown in the map on the top. And it shows like which lines, which in this case transmissions, the ones which you see big in black, are basically the most potentially affected by these cyclone events that we've considered, or different cyclones of different return periods, and they can sustain some sort of physical risks as high as, in our model, 7.2 million Jamaican dollars if a given overhead line is damaged. But then there's the economic risks that we have also calculated, and they could even be substantial. And one of the things from these maps that you note is like not every asset with the highest damage might have the highest economic impact. And this is something what we see with infrastructures. It's not that your most expensive asset might sustain the most highest economic impact. Sometimes it's those assets which sometimes are kind of directly low-lying assets connected to customers or connected to kind of really the end users, which might actually have higher impacts. And you might maybe, for example, in electric systems, we generally, transmission level assets are bigger, they are more expensive, but they're also designed to better standards. But then distribution level assets might actually not be designed to better standards, and they might also kind of result in higher economic impacts. Similarly, if you have a picture for the water nodes, potable water as an example, so this also shows in the map on the above the same kind of direct damage picture, and below is the indirect loss picture. And here again, kind of in these maps, you will see like the direct damages. You can see locations around Kingston of lots of assets where kind of the damages are pretty high, 10 to 48 million Jamaican dollars in our analysis. But then there are also comparable economic risks which are kind of associated with lots more assets. By the way, these static maps, you can probably see much better when Tom starts showing the interactive tool and everything. This is just my attempt at showing some static maps that we can generate for, I guess, this kind of presentation purposes. Similar, if you're interested in roads, you can kind of identify roads within Jamaica, which are the most kind of exposed to all sorts of flooding. When I say climate risks on this slide, I mean like basically combined effect of the all sorts of flooding that roads are exposed to. And this also kind of gives us a flavor of where on the road network there are different kind of highest concentration of economic impact, physical risk in terms of direct damages, and then the economic risk. There are certain roads which have, in our analysis, shows a lot of economic loss of potential, and these are roads, I think, connected to mainly the ports in Kingston and towards, I guess, in the north as well. But yeah, these kind of insights, basically what these three slides of maps that I kind of showed you, the basic message over there is that it gives you this kind of criticality or hotspot kind of map. Yes, thank you. So, sorry, a question?
I noticed from the last 4 slides, you mentioned climate risk without specifying what specific risk you were talking about.
Yeah, so when I say climate risk in these slides, I mean the risk due to flooding. I showed a table before which says like for each individual asset, we have like looked at all kind of hazards that they are exposed to. So the risk over here is with respect to, in this case, in the potable water, it's mainly flooding risks. In the case of roads also, it's floods. And when I say floods, I'm actually just taking all like pluvial and coastal flooding at this, like it's an aggregated estimate of that. In the case of the overhead lines which I showed, it pretty much was about cyclones, because we have assumed that transmission lines are only affected by, well, they are high up in the, they are not affected by flooding, they're at a height. So yeah, overheads basically has a specific risk that infrastructure we feel faces the most. Or we've been told that this is what we should consider, I guess. So from this kind of, I would just emphasize that the value of our work is mainly this asset level analysis and building this systemic picture from the asset scale. And you can kind of now use these results if you know and build some big picture kind of insights. And I have to say these come with a health warning, because kind of what we have done is I've just added up kind of all the numbers coming from an individual network, and sometimes that leads to a lot of overestimation. And we have a lot of kind of people nervous within our team as well, who kind of not who feel like, well, this is an overrepresentation of some of the losses. But mostly people are very interested in big picture or big numbers. When you quote billions or millions of losses, people love it. Anyway, and these kind of show some sort of, these kind of also kind of shows this story of what infrastructure disruptions really or damages really mean. So most of these big picture insights basically show, magnify the indirect economic impacts due to infrastructure. And that's pretty much the message over here, that infrastructures do lead to higher indirect economic impacts. So if we kind of cumulatively just add up all the direct damages that we have calculated across a given type of hazards, say fluvial, coastal, and cyclones, then we kind of get this, we see that cyclones produce a lot of kind of indirect effects, and fluvial also produces a lot. And the direct damages are kind of consistent within some sort of like, they're 11 to 54 billion Jamaican dollars, which I think previously in the previous session they were quoting about the numbers of these past events that were organized, and this our estimates are in the similar ballpark. But cumulative indirect impacts can have a very magnified effect that can, according to our analysis, can affect up to 10% of GDP in the country. And this is kind of an interesting story to kind of think about, like in terms of like what is the knock-on effects of infrastructure disruption, how worse they can get in an aggregated picture. And if we look at sector by sector, if we do a comparison, then just looking at first the direct or the damage pictures, and then we have like infrastructure like roads, which are most affected by fluvial flooding, and then boats and electricity assets are associated by, are most affected by coastal and cyclones, and these effects, I mean, in the case of cyclone, they dwarf most of them. But also in these plots, as you see, there's a huge range of uncertainty that we have to appreciate in our estimates. And then when you add on the indirect, you kind of see that the indirect in some sectors completely dwarf everything else. And in this plot, you might think lots of them, others are zero. They're actually not, they're very small values because the indirect impacts have really dwarfed them. But this kind of gives the story that water and energy assets in our model, we have taken a lot of, they do have a lot of indirect effects, which is kind of somewhat reflects the reality that these infrastructures are very kind of supporting several other infrastructures. And if everybody needs water, so they are kind of being knocked out, does have severe knock-on effects. And if we kind of integrate this, as I said, I've been using the word climate probably a bit loosely here as well, but where the climate change kind of term comes, change term comes in effect is when we kind of look at the long-term kind of evolution of these impacts for flood events or flood maps or cyclone maps or something, not just in the present but over time, which in our case we have all these future flood maps for fluvial, coastal flooding and cyclones for the future, say 2050, 2080, up till the end of century, which are kind of based on global climate and some regional climate model projections. People have built these maps to kind of say, like, in the future how these floods outlines might change, and then we have used them. And what this shows is for different climate scenarios. So the color that you see in green is generally this RCP 2.6 scenario, which is a scenario which says that this is in line with your Paris Agreement kind of thing, like global emissions will already start reducing, so it's a responsible climate scenario. And then on the other hand is the one which you see in the red is the RCP 8.5, which is the one where nothing is going to happen, it's going to get worse. Emissions keep increasing till the end of the century. And under these different kind of scenarios, we see the evolution of risks, of these aggregated risks. And we kind of see an interesting picture that mostly in Jamaica, under most kind of future climate scenarios, risks are increasing. Cyclones, it's a massive increase. Maybe there might be some decline, or maybe in certain scenarios under for fluvial and fluvial flooding, but coastal and cyclone do have an increase. And interestingly, the worst scenario in some cases might not result in the worst disruption. And this is kind of sometimes the message for from climate change is not that it doesn't necessarily mean that because of climate change things might, your risks in some cases might become worse. They can even go down. Because the flip side of the story of floods is always droughts. So you might have less flooding, but you might have increased droughts. So in our kind of analysis, we've looked at droughts, and the picture of droughts is that basically in this, if you kind of, in the previous slide, flooding was basically showing this RCP 8.5 scenario that things were literally going a little bit down. But the flip side was that it's actually going to get worse when it comes to droughts. And for the potable water sector, some of our analysis shows that under future droughts, under future climate scenarios, there'll be a huge kind of increase in number of people affected who are dependent on the customers of the potable water sector. And if we factor into what costs will be involved in terms of the tankering costs that would have to be put more and more into supplying water to these affected customers, then there's a huge kind of cost of drought, which can kind of climb up to 6 billion Jamaican dollars under future climate scenarios for kind of more extreme drought events. So this kind of picture shows that mainly kind of the story of hazard is kind of complex, and you can kind of see changes in that which are unexpected, and in some cases they can be quite accelerated in the future. So I'll just come quickly to this adaptation analysis approach. Now, once we've kind of done this whole risk bit, we've kind of looked at our assets, built these maps and this picture about what is the damages, what are the losses and everything, and quantified them. The adaptation analysis that we have done is looking at some sort of a specific measures intended to reduce climate risks to infrastructures. And our adaptation options, our message over here is that we are looking at generalized options, and the value of this tool is to compare, like if you kind of say that I want to implement a certain option, what kind of generalized option you can implement and where could it be the most effective. We can always introduce very specific, if you have very deep knowledge of an individual asset and you want certain type of adaptation option to be implemented over here, we can also integrate that within our tool. But at present, we have looked at some very general kind of options. And within the adaptation, it looks at this cost of investing. Like suppose you want to invest in adaptation, then there's a cost that you have to initially kind of build something to make it more kind of climate resilient, and then you have to maintain it over time. And the benefit side of the story is this avoided risk side of the story, basically these net present values of these damages and losses that you are incurring over a certain time. And if I'm assuming you're all aware of this benefit cost ratio concept, which is very, very common in costing your effectiveness of your investments. So it's that simple concept that we've used. And just to kind of show you a bit of how this kind of works in terms of, suppose you have a certain infrastructure asset which you have deemed to be damaged or disrupted, and so you kind of do the adaptation analysis where you see the evolution of its risks over time, and then you look at some sort of adaptation option, and it's comparing that cost and the benefit on the benefit side of is on the top and the cost. So and then calculating the net present value over time. So this is, I guess, very standard practices in when people kind of build project cases. So as an example, what I'm talking about is, I'll just give you a small flavor of an example. There's more adaptation options that we've considered, and we can explore that in the tool visualization when Tom talks about it. But for example, one adaptation option, and as I said, it's general, we look at is building a protection wall around electricity power plants and substations that are exposed to flooding. And there's an initial investment in building a wall of a certain height. So if you want to build a 1 meter wall, this is the kind of cost we have considered. This estimate comes from studies, not in Jamaica, unfortunately. We've looked at studies which were done in the United Kingdom or in US or other kind of global sources. And then there's a maintenance cost, and assuming that you have a discounting rate over time. And if you're implementing this, which for us, the present was like 2019, and you implement it till you keep maintaining it till the end of the century, then what is the kind of adaptation cost benefit kind of picture that you get? So this, our assumption is that you implement this option for each electricity power plant and substation that you have found exposed to floods and at risk due to floods. So this is kind of a general option applicable in our assumption to every kind of power plant in the country and substation in the country. And the picture that you build out of this is for each individual asset, you kind of find this whole kind of net present value of cost over time, and you can find the avoided risk over time, and you can then build this map, which is the map on the right hand side. This is benefit cost ratio. And not this option, I mean, so if you can see this, I don't know how far you're from the TV, but the benefit cost ratio map numbers are from some sort of 0.1 all the way till 2.5. So what the story over here is that this option might not be the best option for most assets, where the benefit cost ratio, if it's below 1, it means like this is too expensive, or this is not the ideal option. But then there are some assets for which the benefit cost ratio might be greater than 1. And when it is greater than 1, basically means there is a benefit which is greater than the cost that you're investing in. So for whatever investment you are doing, you are actually avoiding more losses over time, so it is beneficial for you. So the idea of this whole analysis is that highlighting these assets, and within our analysis, for example, in this map, there are, I think, 2 substations where out of all that we find that the option works. So the story over here is basically to kind of build this picture, and in a way, those 2 substations are the candidates for your prioritization of adaptation, which you've kind of said, like, well, I have noticed that these have the highest benefit cost ratio, and this is also greater than 1, which means it's a beneficial investment to make. In the tool, we have kind of visualized all of this, and as Tom will kind of show you interactively, and you can kind of look at it yourself, is that this capability has been integrated in terms of in an interactive way where you can kind of look at and rank your most cost beneficial assets and kind of look at these ratios, and you can kind of look at them for different kind of flood scenarios and different kind of future climate outlooks, and for different levels of protection as well, in this case for flood walls. One of the things in this project was also kind of nature-based solutions, which as an adaptation option, and we have kind of built some initial exploratory analysis. We do have the tools to kind of take it further, but one of the things that we looked at is the effect of mangroves in acting as flood barriers. And there was a previous study that was done with the PIOJ and the World Bank, and colleagues in University of I think in California somewhere, I forget. But basically this study called Forces of Nature looked at the effect of mangroves as providing changes in, creating changes in floods, coastal flooding in Jamaica, and we used their study results. And essentially what they showed through their study was comparing how coastal floods might change with and without mangroves in the country. So whatever changes they predicted from their models, we have applied them to our models. And what this map over here shows in orange different areas of mangroves, and there's some blues over here which show the different flood changes like due to these areas of mangroves. And you can see where mangroves might have more effect in reducing flooding. And when we apply that to our study, we basically effectively what it means, like if an area is flooded and then you put a mangrove over there, and then because of the mangroves the flood depth decreases, that means that then the risk might decrease in terms of at a lower flood depth the asset might not be affected. And having used this data, we have applied it to kind of every infrastructure asset that we've considered that was exposed to coastal flooding, and see how its risks might decrease, or in some cases actually even they can even increase. So a sample kind of result of this analysis is kind of looking at coastal roads, or roads in general, mostly coastal roads which are affected by flooding, coastal flooding, and then if you have mangroves around them. So what you see colors in green are those kind of roads which have a net kind of positive benefit of mangroves, which is again the net present value calculation under a certain under a certain climate scenario. And there's some roads also in pink over here that you see, which are actually roads which actually the risk, flooding risk might increase because of mangroves. So it's a very interesting story with nature-based solutions. You have to be conscious about not every time, they might produce a benefit. So we have to kind of appreciate the two sides of the story. But overall, we see that for roads in Jamaica, in our analysis under a certain, like this we have other climate scenarios, I've just highlighted this one. But for example, in our RCP climate 4.5 climate scenario, we see that the total benefits to roads from mangroves is between 50 to 180 million Jamaican dollars, with some sort of 108 as a mean estimate. So overall, they are beneficial, but we have to also appreciate the site-specific nature of those effects, and that's pretty much the story over here. So just to conclude, and I hope kind of the story has been clear, and of course we are here to answer more and more questions, but before I hand over to Tom to kind of allow you to go into the details of the tool, so what we have achieved over here is basically create like this extensive database of infrastructure networks and hazards, and in a very spatial scale, and then map these systemic hazard exposures, vulnerabilities, physical risks, and everything, and economic impacts. And these maps that I've shown you basically do highlight this story of criticality, identify locations where risks are concentrated. And within our kind of method, the power of the method is that it is a process for which we can then use at the asset level. If we have that knowledge of its risk, we can use it to incorporate adaptation options and assess their effectiveness, and then prioritize our adaptation. So yeah, that's pretty much kind of my talk, and thank you very much for your time and attention. This was meant to be just an overview leading to Tom's kind of unveiling of the tool, I guess, and to just give you a background story of how these things are done. But yeah, happy to take questions. Thank you very much. I think I see a hand up.
Question is, to what extent was Earth observation data used to support development of the tool, and what is actually available in terms of Earth observation data on the tool for use?
So for Earth observation data, if I understand, we use some, so we got data from on land use from the Forestry Department, which is based on Earth observation. That data set was created as far as I understand. Then we have some slope data for Jamaica, which comes from, if I understand correctly, Earth observation, right, Tom? Yeah, oh, sorry, that's a digital elevation. But mostly for the infrastructure kind of locations and all of that, that's not Earth observation. That's simply like geospatial, GIS kind of data. And for the hazard data sets that we have used, they're also not Earth. Some models might have Earth observation in building them in the outputs. So for us, the hazards is like we have just used the outputs of hazard models that other people have created. So when I say like we've used these hazard maps, this is something that somebody else created, and we have kind of used them in our study. So there's not much, I think, Earth observation data in our analysis, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I mean, it can be introduced within the tool if it kind of gives some very specific detailed site information that we are missing.
Okay, so the use is limited currently?
Yes, the use is limited because the purpose of this whole kind of exercise was to collect this infrastructure spatial information, which doesn't really require Earth observation data, like the location of where a power plant is there, or an overhead line. Earth observation generally doesn't do very good in kind of extracting that kind of information. With hazard information, yeah, I know that Earth observation products are being developed increasingly. There are kind of all these flood maps which have been developed using Earth observation. But when it comes to kind of understanding climate change and impacts into the future, for that you need models. You need kind of, because Earth observation is not going to tell you how a flood would look in 2050 or 2080. That's where you kind of use these climate models and then combine with these flood models that people have developed and enhanced. And many of these flood maps now, people are using Earth observation within their kind of development of these flood maps. But as I said, we have used the product of that process that people have developed, these outputs.
Thank you.
I see another hand over there.
My question, if I can follow up on
Sure.
that. Thank you. Could you speak a bit about the availability of data and issues related to cost? So if you're talking about ground truthing, international data, I think the slide you had some different sources. How are you hindered, or how does it help to have different data sources, and are there costs associated with them, and how do you work around that? I almost said over.
Yeah,
I've been in virtual for so long.
Maybe I'll also say over after that. Thanks for the question. So, I mean, data, of course, as you see, this whole thing underpins a lot of data. So data is all of the challenge, and I have to thank Edson, who's sitting in the back of the room, who's meticulously collected a lot of data from agencies in Jamaica. So I mean, there is a cost involved in collecting data, of course, and Edson can probably tell you what is the cost of running around the whole country and collecting all that information. And the better the data, the more kind of granular it is, the better it is for our models and more accurate. So we have kind of, in our analysis, one of the things we have also done in this whole process is that we have taken a lot of data sources and kind of processed them and then kind of standardized them in a way that they work into our tools. So if you kind of in the future have a upgraded kind of information, updated information on your infrastructure asset or your hazard, then within our tool, we do prescribe some preferred file formats, of course, that we would like the data to be input in, and then that can be processed much easily. But a lot of this is basically taking a lot of spatial data sets in different formats and then processing them and putting them within the tool. And of course, there's a lot of kind of improving data quality is always an iterative and ongoing process. So at present, we have tried to get what is the best data available, but I would imagine that there's a lot of cost involved in kind of improving that, and that's more to kind of, I would probably, organizers in Jamaica who are creating more of these data sets, probably, they would know that better. Yeah, Jim can also answer that. Yeah.
In that our preference overall is to use open data while that is available. There are two.
Can I take this off?
However, to do something as detailed and precise as this in Jamaica would not be possible with open data. And so there are two categories of additional data which are not open here. One is data that comes from agencies within Jamaica, which for one reason or another have provided their data specifically under license within this, this tool. And we find that everywhere, that for a variety of reasons, maybe security reasons, maybe commercial reasons, there are certain data sets which people are not able to share openly, and that's been the case here as well. And then the other point is that though there are many freely available, for example, climate data products, for certain applications, and one is flood modeling, there are the products that you pay for are better. And we wanted to use the highest possible resolution flood modeling that we could in Jamaica, so that comes from a commercial provider, and so that can't be shared freely. And I think, I mean, we might wish to have a longer conversation around these questions, both of data confidentiality and of data cost, but that's the reality of the situation, not just in Jamaica, but in most places around the world.
Thank you. Passing the baton.
Thank you. So I think my question, in a sense, follows up on the one that Pat and Simone raised earlier. So I wanted to know, speaking on behalf of Dr. Henry, what do you consider to be the limitations of this, and what kinds of suggestions or tips you have for somebody who is using the output at the end to really make important decisions? And some of the challenges you mentioned, and I suppose we can read in those challenges some potential limitations, but I just wanted to hear at the outset. So we want to be making decisions because we're looking at the prioritization tools. What do we need to say to ourselves? Okay, you may need to adjust this by a factor so, or so on. Thank you.
Include my question.
Sure, definitely.
You may answer it based on her question. So I wanted to know how much of the infrastructure plans for the various agencies were included in your modeling. So for the electric utility, the water utility, the road network, how much of those expansion plans or utility infrastructure plans were included in your modeling? So that would, your answer would tie both
much.
Together. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, regarding kind of how this can be kind of basically when it comes to decision making, whether you do believe our numbers or not. So that's kind of, I mean, one of the things with the prioritization or this process that we have built, I guess I always say that this is kind of a first order kind of screening method where at a national scale, of course, you cannot do a detailed site investigation of everything in your country, but if you have a tool like this, you can kind of identify the most kind of critical ones, and then I would say it should be followed by a site investigation to kind of understand what is the reality on the ground, because of course in these kind of high-level model assumptions, even if you have data from within the country, you do, after all, it's a model, and people always say like every model is wrong, but some models do better than the others. So I mean, in that way, I would kind of say that if as much as kind of some of the limitations for us has been that in different stages of our kind of modeling built up, we did encounter some sort of gaps. For example, for the transport sector, for roads, or in general in transportation, we had little knowledge of kind of how things are really moving around the country. We had some information of number of vehicles and roads and stuff, but when I say like how does trade kind of, if something comes into the Port of Kingston, where does it go into the country in some aggregated way? I don't want to track every vehicle in the country and what it's sending, but how much aggregated goes towards Kingston, how much goes to St. Andrews, how much goes to Clarendon, or those kind of things, which port is connected to which kind of other kind of land, hinterland link, like the railway linkages or those kind, and what kind of commodities. So we've kind of studied that a lot and built models within to kind of quantify it as best as we could. But if that kind of knowledge comes also from within the country, it could make our estimations in some sense improve. And that's just one example. Cost information, what's the cost of an adapt? Like as I said, the adaptation option that we have considered is a very general kind of one, and we looked at costs in other countries. We did not really get any information on Jamaica. And then when it comes to kind of infrastructure plans and everything, so my colleague Olivia has done a very extensive study on the water sector, where she has consulted very extensively with the NWC and other water companies, utilities, to kind of understand the plans, developments, and everything. We have kind of, we had some consultations with JPS on the energy as well, in terms of like what is the, what might be the future plans, and a lot of it was about kind of what renewables and stuff could be kind of put into the grid, and we've seen some of that if it's possible in terms of like, because one of the things with like solar and wind was also seen as some sort of a development into the future that is also a climate resilient option, in the sense that at least the ones that have been built to higher standards, and they are resilient also against some sort of floods and stuff, whereas the old ones are not, the one your diesel, gas, and those kind of stuff. So these kind of things we've included. With transportation, we did have some kind of information on some kind of road projects, but the thing is, there was also a challenge, and lots of this data, the plans, I mean, for our models to work, if that is also supplied in terms of like spatial information on where this road is going to go from and to where, and then we can integrate that into our model. But we kind of use some sort of improvements into future roads in terms of saying like, well, if some road qualities at present are low, maybe they're going to be improved into the future. So maybe looking at changes into the existing network more than like looking at expanding the network. And the road network that we considered was very extensive to begin with. I think there was lots of kind of, most of the roads were kind of covered into the country. So yeah, there's those kind of limitations, you know, depends on kind of what information you get from within the sector and how much you can introduce that within your model. But it's, if you have the information, then yeah, you can include that in our model. Dr. Henry.
Thank you very much. Good exercise. Thank you very much. And so excellent presentation and demonstration here and the capabilities. And so very good to see, and thank you to Jim and the team. I'm going to have to run, so I can't stay for, I will just run into another engagement. But I wanted to ask, from the capabilities demonstrated here, you should be able to incorporate forest cover, right, from a nature-based solution standpoint.
Yeah.
And look at, say, our forestry department is undertaking a program now for reforestation, you know, for a number, you know, large area of the island, and the cost of that in terms of mitigating, right, and preventing, you would say, flooding, you know, inducing greater rainfall, and so that's something I think easily could be very useful, or not. I'm looking at Claire, the expert, but I just wanted to hear, you know, as I saw the mangroves and you're looking at NBS, and I thought useful. So my mind begins to go in a lot of directions, but as Claire highlighted, I think as a prioritization tool, you know, given the limitations, but the recommendations you are making is that this thing has a lot of potential, right? A lot of promise. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And my colleague Robin has kind of looked into, I mean, actually in the tool, I didn't show it in the slides, but we do have kind of information on land use and different kinds of forests, including forests, and what's this proximity to different infrastructures, and then using them as potential candidates. If this forest is close to infrastructure, is it going to kind of create a benefit in terms of reducing floods to that infrastructure? So that's something that we have kind of, we were kind of a bit limited in time that we couldn't really take it to the end of the calculations, but we kind of have a method in place to at least do it, and we have done some of it, which is kind of incorporated in the visualization tool already. Yeah, there's a question over there at the end.
Yes, I want to know if this data can be integrated with design to reduce or to avoid the impact of infrastructure failure?
Design as in designing a new, yes, it can be. I mean, one of the things is like if you're building a new infrastructure and you have information on where it is, I mean, you need this kind of spatial information of that infrastructure, like how the plan looks on the ground, kind of thing, and maybe not exactly detail the whole plan of the area, but the area is going to build and the connectivity that is going to have to the rest of the existing infrastructure. And then you can kind of then estimate within because one of the things is with the detailed hazard mapping, you can kind of know like, is a new infrastructure going to be built at a location where we know that there's a potential exposure to floods or I mean different types of floods or different types of cyclones or those kind of things. So it can be included into the analysis, I would say. Yeah, we have another question over there.
It's a very simple question, and I'm hoping that the answer is yes.
Sure.
So
yes. Okay.
So can I at any point in time degrade my infrastructure? Can I give the infrastructure 100% okay, 75% okay, 50, 25%? Let's say it's undergone a shock, but not a shock to completely devastate it. Can I degrade my infrastructure so that if it's exposed to something else, given the degradation, I can now see what happens? So I'm hoping the answer is yes.
It is yes, in fact, yeah, because one of the things, when I said damage, so when we quantify damage, we have kind of something called a damage curve, which says that for a given level of a hazard, this is the fraction of an infrastructure that will be damaged. It doesn't mean that if the whole road is under some flood, the whole road might not be damaged. It might only be a fraction of that road that might damage. And so we've used there's this thing called fragility analysis of fragility curves or damage curves, which people have built. And they quantify, like, for a given magnitude of a hazard, what will be the percentage of a damage that is, a fraction of damage that an asset can sustain. So we have used that into our analysis. So yeah, yes, I guess. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, still morning, afternoon, everyone. Apologies that I missed the first part of the presentation, so if this was discussed, I do apologize. There is one aspect of making the decision, which is looking at the economic side of things and doing all the analysis. My question is there a way to also capture the social element? So if for example, there's infrastructure that is to benefit a particular number of persons, but perhaps in doing the feasibility, it may seem a little too costly. Does the tool allow for adjustments given the possible social benefits that could be derived?
So within our methods, we do have kind of, we have quantified like number of people affected by an infrastructure that will be disrupted. And in a way, when I kind of say the economic value of disruption, some of it includes like a usage by, for example, in terms of water, it's like how many people are affected by loss of water and what is the cost of kind of providing water to that people, those number of people. So when you quantify number of people disrupted, so you are kind of quantify some sort of social vulnerability kind of index in terms of understanding how many people are affected. And given the spatial nature of that quantification, we can even tell in which parts of the country how many people are affected. We do not have, I have to say, this was something I was very interested in, but we didn't really get some kind of data on, we got data on population spread in the country, but we were also interested in kind of seeing like some sort of a, what is that, the economic status of the population, like what is the average kind of household income in a certain part of the country, which would give us a richer understanding of these number of people who are affected in certain areas, how kind of poor or rich they are, and that it can be done in the model. At present, we just know number of people affected, so we do have that kind of quantification in our model. Any other questions? I can give it over to Tom for the tool. Sure.
I'll be very brief. So first of all, thank you so much, Raghav and the team at Oxford. And just wanted to highlight a couple of points and also share a very brief conversation we just had now. First of all, in highlighting the innovative dimension of what you're presenting and what you have developed, particularly that combination of the direct and indirect cost and impacts. That is really, really necessary to go beyond the value of a specific asset or the price tag of is the dependence on that asset from a community, a society, and an economy. So that is really transformational in itself and innovative and allows for very practical decision making. On the social component to this, there is also the consideration of greenfield versus brownfield infrastructure. So how, as you indicate, Raghav, you've been thinking a lot about identifying population concentrations with ratios of poverty or any indicator that gives us a sense of social vulnerability. And it may happen that where those concentrations are, maybe there is a need for new infrastructure. So that is also something that should be brought to the table, and it is indeed part of it, and even follow-up phases. On a couple of points, and actually on follow-up phases, is on nature-based solutions that, as you indicated, you have done great work here, and actually this week also marks kind of the handover where the Green Climate Fund will be going into the interpretation of the JSRAT in terms of specific interventions, and that is where MBS will be an option to be optimized as partial total substitute to gray infrastructure. And I think that that's going to be really interesting also in collaboration with you. And then the last point about asset level, and I think that you also made great references there, Raghav, about cost-benefit ratios, discount rates, and what we are learning within CCRI and in other working groups is that the impacts of physical climate risks into the performance of an asset is not only loss and damage related. There are many other considerations that are softer, so accelerated depreciation, lesser revenue because lesser use even if the asset is fine. So that's something that in due course also will be brought to inform the specific design of each of those assets. But just wanted to mention that, but mainly thank you. Excellent presentation, and I stop here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I just want to give a shout out to my team, Robin, Olivia, Jasper, Aman, who's not here, and Tom. I guess a lot of work has gone into doing this, so yeah, hopefully we have a good time in the training and handing this over to you. So yeah, thanks a lot. So Tom, I guess it's over to you.
Thanks, Raghav. How's that looking? Yeah, is it all there, all shared and everything?
No, it's not on the. Can you put the computer on the screen? Can you say that on the mic?
Can we switch the screen over to mirror this screen? Yeah, go ahead.
So now that the system has been handed over, who will do the administration and the maintenance of it?
So that is
who will we contact or support or even for some of the questions like what Mr. Campbell asked? Just general, how do we go about getting admin support now that it's handed over and some of those other things?
So the tool will be hosted by the IOJ. As I've said, the team in Oxford is going to continue to have an interest in the tool, and so we'll be able to provide some assistance. Exactly how the hosting and continued admin of the tool is going to happen is still to some extent being finalized. I'm looking towards Edson, who's been looking at a number of the technical issues associated with Government of Jamaica systems and how this tool might work best within those systems. Do you want to add any brief summary now, Edson?
Right, so of course, capacity building is always a part of any project that we have with external entities. So the expectation, and technically, in terms of hosting, it hasn't been technically handed over as yet, because of course we have to finalize bearing in mind the different requirements of entities that have contributed, like JPS. Of course, earlier the team spoke about the data integrity and security of the data, so we are ensuring that we're addressing all of those issues before we make a final decision in terms of hosting. But in terms of capacity building, that is built into the project, and so managers will be identified within PIOJ who are the owners of the system, and then the management going forward and sustainability will be handled inside of PIOJ and by Jamaicans, of course.
Thank you. So can we share the screen now? Share Tom's screen?
Yeah, we're there. Okay. Thanks for your patience. I'm going to sort of walk through and explain the basics of the tool, and then I'll be able to share a demo login and password so those online or with laptops can hopefully get some direct hands-on. Was that another question? Are you okay for now? Zoom in, yep. Let's see how we can do that. Yeah, I might need to change it again, but let's see how we go. Anyway, homepage gives a quick introduction, which essentially Raghav's covered already, so I will pass on that in detail. But we cover energy, transport, and water. These are the primary outputs that we get from the tool. The code for this visualization tool that you're looking at is open source and online on GitHub, as is the underlying analysis codes that have been referred to as well. So where we've developed codes for this project, they're all open and available. The data is treated securely and safely and is not otherwise public. Thanks to the collaboration and engagement, funding and support. Okay, so across the top of the tool, we've got these tabs which step through the analysis process as Raghav's outlined. So we have exposure, then we look in more detail at risk, the adaptation options, and we can do some exploration of nature-based solutions. There's a link to data sources, which just gives some metadata at the moment. Okay, so let me talk you through the interface briefly, because this will sort of get repeated throughout the different screens. In general, we have a control sidebar over on the left where you can select what's displayed on the map, how it's displayed, and change some parameters. Within the map, this is a fairly usual web mapping system. So you can pan around, zoom in and out, use the zoom controls. You can change the layers, so we can take labels off in case you want to see data a little more clearly. And we can change the background to satellite, assuming the Wi-Fi is working. There we go. If that's a more useful backdrop map for whatever you're looking at the moment. We can also search. This is based on OpenStreetMap searching, so we can look for, we can search for Jamaica as a whole, for example, and that will take us back to the view of the whole island. Okay. Talk briefly through the layers that we can see, and this lets you sort of drill through precisely the information that's there. Don't want to be closer, I feel like it's echoing. Okay, cool. So in the power sector, we've got the transmission system, which consists of substations. We can bring in the high voltage lines, lower voltage system, which is much larger, and also our representation of poles. Let me zoom in a little bit before loading some poles. I won't step through absolutely everything, but just to give you the idea, you can hover and get some brief information of what you're looking at, and click to select it, which brings up the details details of the assets that have been provided. Essentially, these properties with their source, and then later we'll look more through the specific risk and adaptation options that come per option. So let's take the power system off and just show you briefly. Under transport, we have airports, ports, we've got the road network with all your various classes of road. That brings in more and more detail. And if we look down to the metro system, I might need to zoom in even more to give you a clear idea that we've got each road mapped in detail. There we go. And within the water system, similarly, we've got each of the subsectors mapped under potable supply. The various supply facilities that you can select, deselect, and drill through as you're interested. Okay. Still building up the details. We can bring in each of the hazards. So, as covered previously, we've got the river flooding, surface water flooding, coastal flooding, and cyclone maps. And for each of those, there are return period maps, which if I toggle on, we can see the river flooding here under a 100-year return period. You can look at the depths. So this is the physical water depth for a 1 in 1500-year flood in this particular location. Under baseline scenarios, so current day scenarios, if we look forward into the future, we can look under different climate scenarios, so that each of the climate scenarios that the flood data has come into the system with. So that gives you the same detail for each kind of flooding. We have surface water flooding, coastal flooding, perhaps not here, there we go, and the cyclones, which affect in this sort of mapping, the cyclone wind speeds affect the whole island pretty consistently, because of the way that cyclone paths could cross the island in any different way. So there's not a great deal of variation across the island spatially when we look at the sort of expectation of wind speed. Yeah, question over there.
What resolution model were you looking at for the cyclones?
The number off the top of my head is, I've forgotten. It's relatively low resolution. 10 kilometer resolution. Thanks, Raghav.
That's a little bit of a challenge because there is a vast variation going from north to south, where winds are concerned, and even the number of tropical, the impacts from tropical cyclones are concerned. So there's a distinct variation from the south coast to the north coast, as well as east to west, because of that central mountain range.
That's interesting. So that wasn't present in the data that we've put through, and it would certainly be interesting to take if there are return period maps for wind speeds at a higher resolution that show that change. Then that would certainly be interesting to run through and look at how the results have changed. They would presumably change significantly.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead with the next question at the front.
Thank you. For data credibility and integrity purposes, thank you. So I'm questioning data integrity and credibility. So in moving the cursor over the various points, when the attribute data comes up, I'm noting that I'm not seeing as source the organization or the entity of whom I'm guessing would have provided the data. I'm thinking that's very important, that we acknowledge the organizations, and I'm not seeing that there. It may be the case for other data sets, but for the ones I've seen, it's not there. So I'm questioning that and stating that that needs to be represented.
Thanks. Yeah, well received as a comment. We don't have it built into the interactions, and it would be a further step. But here we have the data sources and attributions.
It wouldn't be in there. They don't normally put it there somewhere. There's a source. No, but maybe it has the metadata where the source is. So that's the next question. In the metadata, would you have the source? Or there's a person name? Yes. Oh, okay. Okay, okay.
So if I can kind of, with some of that, there's also the challenge that sometimes organizations don't want people to know that the data came from them. And we have kind of had that in terms of it's with confidentiality issues and stuff. So some, yeah, I mean, we are happy to include all of that information. It's from our side, there's no, and this is we take your feedback, and if that's the requirement, we are happy to do that. But we have encountered many times that organizations have been reluctant to be associated with data.
Okay. Let's drive on and show briefly in detail that you can, so we spoke briefly about the association of economic activity to buildings and the mapping between that and the infrastructure assets. So here, the buildings data set's reasonably large. Let's bring something in. So here we get the building footprints coloured by broad category of use, and if you inquire as to a specific building, you can see the GDP that's been associated with it and the direct damages that have been assessed for that specific building. What you can do initially here, just to give the idea, is to bring together to overlay some of the hazard mapping with the infrastructures. Then you can see visually what we've done in code. We've intersected the assets with the hazards. So we've taken the raster layers, each and every one of them that may have some effect on the specific infrastructure asset or the building, and found that flood depth that asset is exposed to at that return period. So you can do that sort of first visual look there, but let me take you to the risks where we might want to zoom out and look at something across the whole island. So for example, in the power sector, with the substations, we have specific substations that are at particularly high risk of river flooding, or in the transport sector, again, let's just look at roads. We can bring in the roads and see the hotspots there, where you can, within the tool, as I've showed before, zoom back in and find the detail, and look at either the direct damages or the economic losses applied to those roads across the individual flood results, or cyclones, in this case roads aren't exposed, again across each of the climate scenarios. So this is really a way to drill through the analysis and evaluate what's driving each factor that you might be looking at. So it lets you dive right into the details and kind of unpacks the whole process, rather than giving you kind of one black box number at the end. I think that's what I want to emphasize by giving you all of this detail. Okay. That's the initial risk picture. Let me show you risk in detail. Oops. Yeah, okay. Still in one piece. Okay. Let's find something that suffers some damages in a hopefully interesting way. Here we go. So road in detail, sorry, I showed you the initial attributes that are associated with the asset first. With this road, let's look at coastal flooding. So here's the expected annual direct damages in the baseline year, and then plotted out increasing under the different climate scenarios. So in darkest blue, we have the 8.5 climate scenario going up to 2100. And there's a reasonable spread between the climate scenarios, so I emphasize again the sort of importance of mitigation, or the importance of that uncertainty, but also the general trend of increasing risk under any of them. In this case, we have a flat line for expected annual economic losses, where if the road is disrupted at all, then this level of disruption occurs. So there's no change. The change that we see in the direct damage is coming from the varying flood depth, but some level of flood depth will always disrupt a road, so the economic loss is static there. Again, with these numbers, you can drill through them and look at the range of uncertainty that we've assigned to each of those values, and from here you can pull down the CSV for the specific asset. So later in the training, we'll show how to access the full data sets and the full analysis, but recognize that within this tool you can look at graphs to your HART's content, but at some point you want to take some numbers and plug them into your further process, so that will enable that. Next level of detail down shows the loss probability curve. So this is looking across each of those return periods. So here 0.5 probability is a 1 in 2 year flood, and the damage at that particular flood map. So integrating under this curve gives you the expected damage, and this shows you the change for the higher intensity, less frequent events, again in the current epoch or looking out towards the end of the century, with the spread between the different climate scenarios. That's my bit on details of risk. That seems pretty good. Cool. Okay, moving on to adaptation. Let me zoom out a bit because hopefully this is still visible for you.
Tom?
Hey.
One question.
Where are you? Oh, there. Yeah, go ahead.
Single RCP, single scenario, or is this a mean of the RCP 8.5? So is that single realization, or is it an ensemble mean for multiple realizations?
With each of the products, we've got a single value. We haven't had multiple climate model sort of ensemble. Raghav, did you want to add something?
Yes. So the hazard maps that we have, when it says a flood in the flood map in the future under RCP something under a return period, it's just as one kind of realization. It's a mean across kind of all these different model ensembles that has been translated into a flood map. We have introduced uncertainty in terms of the uncertainty at the asset level, where there's a uncertainty in the cost of how much this asset might be damaged, or how much kind of the economic impact will be there. But from the hazard side of things, that is not really there's no uncertainty in terms of for a given climate scenario. There's for a given return period, there's one hazard map.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, but
Yeah.
it also, I think, adds a limitation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things with this kind of, so there are products out there which have kind of, there are open source products out there which have, where people have created these flood maps of different kind of RCPs under different kind of climate models. And there's a kind of, for example, you might get like 10 different flood maps for a single RCP for a given single return period and based on different climate models. But those kind of products are kind of very coarse resolution because producing these maps in great detail is computationally very expensive. So there is I know that there's an open source tool out there, but they give like flood maps at like 1 kilometer resolution, and that's a very inferior product, where our flood maps are at 30-meter resolution. So there was a bit of a compromise over here in kind of getting a higher resolution product and getting kind of this one climate scenario kind of future map output of this. But yeah, I do agree with you. That is something. But kind of we've introduced some uncertainty in those calculations, as I said, with the asset level. In the drought analysis, there has been, I mean, my colleague Olivier has looked at different kind of uncertainty across like for a given RCP, there's uncertainty which comes from the signal itself of the kind of the time series of the changing precipitation and changing kind of temperatures which affect your flows of rivers and stuff. So, but yeah, for these flood hazard maps, it's I take your point. There's little uncertainty.
Go ahead. Do you need a microphone?
No. I apologize if I missed it. I'm sure somebody said it before. How do you work in exchange rate differences? Is there an ability, thank you, to put in constant dollars or US dollars, or how has that been factored in when you look at time?
Do you want to go for it?
So we have kind of so the conversion rate that we have taken, yeah, we have taken a fixed kind of conversion rate between Jamaican dollars and US dollars, and lots of our costs originally come in US dollars, which we have like converted to Jamaican dollars. Over time, one of the things that we are doing in terms of economic impacts that are captured, we kind of assume that economic impacts in the future, and it's a simplified assumption, they might change based on some GDP growth scenario for the country. So there's that different kind of, it could be a low, high, or medium kind of scenario, and that's where we've taken some uncertainty. But the cost, and the thing is that the fact that we are doing net present value calculations, we are basically discounting it all to the present value. So that's why we've kind of done these constant cost kind of things, with the same conversion rate.
So if I were working with this model and I wanted to, let's say, put in some exchange rate functions, could I do that, or will it always present in Jamaican dollars?
If you want to just get the results apart in another currency, you mean, apart from Jamaican dollars or what?
So a lot of times when we're seeing rapid inflation, which we anticipate we may be going into something like that now, or even rapid devaluation, a lot of times it's easier to work the constant dollars in US dollars and then do the conversion at the time you need to do the conversion. So I'm just looking at the model and thinking, where would you do that? Would you have like an assumptions page at the beginning that says, okay, this is what you want to do up front, and then the black box then does its thing and you get a number? Because if I'm looking at, let's say, Jamaican dollars 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, it might have been 50% depreciation. So I'm just trying to figure out how that works.
Yeah, in our model you can kind of, I mean, we can produce all these numbers in US dollars as well. It's kind of, yeah, you probably have to go to your, when you're inputting the data, the currency, if you want to work with US dollars or Jamaican dollars, you can specify, you cannot do the conversion, which we have done. We thought the Jamaican dollars resonate better with everybody, so that's why we did everything in Jamaican dollars. But in the model, in the data, I mean, ideally you do it when you input your data into the model and say, like, this is the currency that I'm working with. And yeah, then the model, in the model you can kind of specify a currency conversion factor as well and do your calculations.
There are a couple of questions online. We're trying to get those up.
Okay.
Do you want to do that adaptation?
I believe there's a question online from Adrian Spence. Adrian, would you like to unmute your mic and ask that? Hopefully we'll get you in the room as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly ask, and I think the last question basically alluded to that, about the inclusion of SSPs in the model. Because I do acknowledge the inclusion of RCPs. I know from time to time economic situations will change, and that may have an impact on some of the outputs of the tool. I just wanted to know to what extent was that included or has been included. And the second question really, / comment, was really about, I may have missed it, but I realized that there wasn't any significant inclusion of our natural assets. I realize the focus mostly here is on built assets. And I think natural assets, for example, agricultural lands, are an important part of our socioeconomic realities. The question, the point about drought keeps coming up. And one of the things that we frequently see here is that, droughts are generally synonymous with fires in Jamaica, which results in, huge losses economically, and of course has great social impact on the country. So just wanted to know, to what extent does the tool look at some of our natural assets? Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for that. And there are three parts to that question. One was around SSPs. And as you'll have seen, so for everyone else's benefit, shared socioeconomic pathways, so scenarios for how things may change socioeconomically. The focus of the tool right now is on the current socioeconomic situation. So you'll see those very high resolution maps of population and economic activity. So that really is the strength of this tool, is to be able to analyze the climate impacts to current socioeconomic exposure. As with many of the questions we've had already, Raghav and Thomas said, well, you can do this, but it's not explicitly within the tool right now. And so if you're interested in those types of questions, how might I change this tool in order to do something slightly different, then come along to the Tier 2 training. So that's the advertisement here. On natural assets, Raghav mentioned that, and we'll come to that in a moment, the nature-based solutions area within the tool. So there is quite a lot of information on natural assets, but this tool is focused on infrastructure systems, so we're not looking, for example, at climate impacts on agriculture. Evidence around that will have to come from elsewhere. And then the final point was around fire, and that is a really interesting and important question. In fact, there are, in terms of the climate hazards, as you'll have heard, we're dealing with hurricanes, coastal floods, fluvial floods, surface water flooding, and droughts. The kind of main things which worry, or we would have liked to have included, are fire and landslides. If there were good layers of risk available at the right resolution across Jamaica, then that could be included within the tool. But we don't have a layer of fire risk yet. There is not a fire risk model as far as we're aware that we could incorporate within the analysis.
And if I may add to that, I mean, one of the things about what we presented over hazard is something which is kind of an external input into our kind of model, because most of what we're trying to model over here is impacts to infrastructures due to some hazards that we are kind of using. So if you talk about kind of using future climate, different kind of climate projections, or the other kind of scenarios and stuff, they can all be incorporated within the tool. And yeah, we have included some sort of socioeconomic evolution of losses in the future by assuming that economic losses, especially in the future, might grow based on some GDP growth scenario. So that's like a same scenario for a single number for the whole country. So it's not really saying that GDP might grow unequally across different parts of Jamaica, because we don't have that kind of detailed information. So there's some flavor of that within the tool, within our method in the analysis over here.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Robert, if you're still online, would you like to ask your question now? Hi, Robert. Can you, I don't know if you're talking, but could you unmute and try and ask your question directly? Or you could also type it into the chat. Okay, he has typed it in. Can the tool be used to assess the impact of continuing with mining rather than maintaining our natural assets, particularly in the case of bauxite or alumina, which has significant hazards such as mud lakes and possible negative effects on our water resources?
So as Jim just said, I mean, we're looking at specifically infrastructures and how those are affected. So things which, like things, I mean, in a way we have done detailed kind of hazard mapping. So we have like flood maps that cover the whole country and all of that thing. So if you are interested in the mining sector, you can overlay your mining assets with those flood maps and infer whether they're going to be flooded or not. But we have not specifically, because our story is more in terms of like, will the rail line that's connected to the mine, if that is flooded, then what's the impact in transportation of that alumina and bauxite from the mine to the port that the rail line is connected to? That's our story over here. But yeah, with the flood or the hazard information, detailed spatial, you can do your own intersections to infer that, whether mine itself is vulnerable or flooded or not.
All done? Brilliant. Okay, so within can I go back to this screen within the room? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so this is the adaptation ranking. So we've got assets ranked by benefit cost ratio, looking specifically at any subsector, and then one asset type at a time. So here, looking across the substations in the electricity system, and you can see quickly in this rank list where assets are within the country, and zoom in to see in more detail. And from here you can click back, you select that, and click back to the risk page, then the full details of that particular substation will come up. So there's a way through from big picture, adaptation, zoomed out ranked list, to drill through to those assets which this method prioritizes, again, under the various hazards and scenarios. Let's move on to drought, because there was a couple of questions about that. So here, we show the high-level results from the drought analysis. Looking at a catchment scale here at mean monthly water stress under different climate scenarios. You can ask for the expected population disrupted and the expected annual economic losses, so comparing between economic and to the extent possible, social disruption. And then across these, we've mapped some adaptation options which have been put into points, but they're fairly general. So here we have a leakage reduction scheme that would apply across the whole island, or a transfer scheme that would apply across the north coast. So we haven't mapped those spatially in any great detail, but they feed into the water system model, and then you can look at them by the benefit of that specific intervention.
Just one question, Tom. Can you give me the classification of drought that you're using? Is it hydro, met, agricultural, socio? Is it an SPI 12, 13, 24? Just what the classification? So even though you said it's month, what's the classification of the drought?
Okay, so mean monthly water stress, but I would have to defer to Olivia if she can answer that one.
Total runoff, so I guess hydrological drought, and balance that against demand, water demand, on a catchment scale. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Good.
Just one thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But water is such an important feature for us that this could easily be extended to look at probably, I know you say you're not looking at agriculture, I know, but this could be used to inform, especially if you include your RCPs, you're looking to the future, you can now identify areas that will be more stressed and areas that should possibly be, not be used for farming. But I'm sorry, I was excited at first. I'm now super excited by what I'm seeing because the possibilities are just expanding. So it's not quite a question. It's a plea to just expand the drought area, please. Please.
Yeah, we kind of realize that this kind of thing does open the Pandora's box, and kind of more people see in detail, the more they kind of want. So one of the things with the like for example with the agriculture, we have actually looked at the irrigation assets, and irrigation assets do supply to agricultural lands, and we've kind of seen if irrigation assets are affected by different kind of hazards, how much of agricultural GDP that depends on the irrigation asset will be affected. So there's a story in there, but yeah, as I said, we haven't specifically looked at whether those agricultural lands themselves are drought stressed or flood stressed or those kind of things. But yeah, we do take your point that the more you look into this with detail and everything, the more you will have questions on looking at specific kind of sector. I mean, we admit that even when it comes to infrastructures, we haven't really covered the whole kind of range. We haven't looked at telecoms. We once got a feedback that people said like, well, would you like to look at solid waste? Why have you not included that in your model? So it's always a question of like, with this kind of detailed spatial analysis, there's always appetite for more.
Okay, I think I'm getting pretty close to having walked through at least the major screens. I wanted to show you regions briefly where we've mapped out contextual information. So we've got population enumeration districts. This is a part that it lets you see some of the underlying data set that's fed into those assumptions about population disrupted and the way that everything's come back together. And then I wanted to show you the beginnings of the nature-based solutions piece, where this is within the tool visualization here is currently in a state where you can explore land use and land cover, slope and elevation in terrestrial contexts. So you can, but it's an exploration. We don't have analysis results of effects of changing land cover in here yet. But at least within that, we can identify, say, high slope areas within 100 meters of forest, or whether they're protected or not. That's extremely high slopes. Let's take it down a bit. And like view within the various constraints that we have here, we can look through the land uses with the intention of finding those mixed use or dry forest or agricultural areas that are mapped in this way to start to understand what's there and what's in this data set. But there's not a great deal of further conclusion we can immediately draw. But we'll talk through these and the further methods in more detail in the Tier 2 training. So that's terrestrial. Let me show you the marine ecosystems that we've mapped as well. Hopefully. We looked at coral, seagrass and mangroves, and particularly just started to look at buffer areas around them. So these areas you might wish to extend or protect, and also the sort of shared proximity, so areas which are within 500 meters of mangrove that are perhaps also contain coral or seagrass areas that benefit from those proximities. Okay, I think that's a whiz through each of the things that are in here. I recognise that it raised lots of questions. From here, I wanted to give you a short opportunity, other than asking further questions, to access the tool yourselves. So bear with me and I'll pull up the presentation. Sorry, Tim. I've lost it. Okay, let me put that in presentation mode. There we go. So the tool itself is at jamaica.infrastructureresilience.org, and for the purposes of this session, you should be able to access demo and Jamaica 2022 Oxford. I will advise that. Okay, yeah, take a photo, but it won't work well on mobile. This is designed for desktop, where we've got space to load everything out. And this is this is made available just for this session. So I'll take these details down after this Tier 1 session. So yeah, for Tier 2, we'll provide access for the Tier 2 sessions. And then for further handover, that'll be accessed via PIOJ. So this is not to be shared outside of this session, and it won't be available after lunchtime.
So thanks a lot, Tom. You've got access to the tool now, so I suggest that we break up. We'll be staying in this room, and those of you with laptops, we can hang around and provide some advice if you need to try and do anything. And we'll also be staying here for further discussion and to answer any additional questions that you may have. I think we have some food on its way, possibly, or maybe it's outside. So either enjoy some lunch or use the tool and ask us some questions, or possibly do both. But that, I hope, has given you an overview of what's in the tool interface. We've really appreciated all of those questions, and very happy to answer any other questions. And as you understand, the next phase of the training will go into further depth around the data sets and the ways in which the code is implemented can be modified in order to do some of the things a bit differently that we've begun to talk about in this session. But that's the end of the formal proceedings, but it's certainly not the end of this first session. Please get going with the tool, and we'll keep on chatting about it. Okay, thank you.